Good afternoon. Welcome to our business class today. As I've promised some time ago during the previous classes, we will talk today about formal language and informal language. And I have prepared two short exercises, mostly with phrasal verbs. And we will talk a little bit about phrasal verbs and just normal words and normal verbs that you would mostly use in formal language rather than phrasal verbs. So let's start. I will share my screen. Okay, in order to start, let's talk a little bit about phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are very used, they're very common, but they're mostly used in common language and informal language. You can also use them in business, and you can also use them in professional settings, which is fine. It's just that using phrasal verbs is not as formal as other words are. You can mostly use them when you talk to people that you've worked for a long time, that you have a closer relationship rather than just professional. So let's see a little bit of a few examples. If I am going to, this is a very common example, not really in a professional setting. I used the word exhausted instead of tired, just to show the fact that I am a little bit more than tired. So I'm running out of energy, or I've already run out of energy. And I said, and I will turn in for the night versus I will retire for the night. Turn in is a phrasal verb, retire is just a verb, is a normal verb. Of course, retire would be the formal register rather than turn in. So you know that retire means something else as well. To retire means to stop working because you've reached the retirement age, meaning 60, 65, depending on your gender. The next example. Find out and ascertain. To ascertain means to find out, obviously, because they're synonyms. Now, of course, find out is very used, it's extremely used, even in professional settings or even in just informal settings. But of course, if we want to use a more elevated word or more or a nicer word, or if we don't want to use a phrasal verb, and if we want to avoid that, we have the word ascertain, meaning to find out and also to make sure. And the third example, gone up and increased. You can use both of them in professional settings for sure. Increased, of course, is more formal than gone up. There are other possibilities, and there are other synonyms that you can use instead of increased as well. You can use the verb to rise, to raise as well, depending on the context. But again, if you want to avoid using a phrasal verb and you want to use only one word that would clearly make your sentence more formal, then you can definitely use increased. And of course, this last example is actually a very good example to see the difference between very informal to formal. Wait is not entirely formal. I mean, you can definitely use it in informal language, but to hang on while meaning at the same time meaning waiting is not really formal. So you wouldn't really use it if you are actually talk in a professional setting, or if you are at work, you wouldn't really use the word hang on instead of wait. So I would suggest not using hang on. You would use it very well with friends or family, but maybe not really acquaintances or just people that you know, or not at work. And here is a list of different other phrasal verbs and their there are synonyms in a more formal and a more professional language. So to fix up means to arrange. Definitely you can use them. To pin down is to specify. To pin down is quite informal. It's also used in business or in professional language, but it's much more, it's better to say specify. Told off and reprimanded. Now, it means to scold someone, but reprimanded is not such a used word. Definitely a better choice than to tell off someone. To let down, to disappoint, to put off, to defer. So put off or deferred if we're talking about the participle or maybe the past simple. And to get out of, to avoid. Sometimes you can also use to prevent instead of avoid. Now, I would want you to try to use the words in sentences and try to come up with sentences for the phrasal verbs, a more informal sentence where you would talk to people that you know, to friends or family, where you don't have a business relationship or a professional relationship, and use the other ones in a professional relationship. So you can very clearly see the difference between the first one with the phrasal verb and the second one with just a verb, and then try to not remember really, but try to make associations between the sentence that you make with the phrasal verb versus the sentence that you make with just the verb. And then, because then your brain will remember them like that. If you make association, it's better to, it's useful to remember vocabulary. So we remember vocabulary when we create sentences, when we give to that word or that expression reality or a context. So let's do that. You can also write them on the comments, in the comments section, and we will look at it. And the last exercise, which is part of an email or part of a letter that you would write to your supervisor or to your manager in order to request a career break. A career break is a break of unpaid leave that you take from work for a specific period of time. It can be 1 month, it can be several months, it can be a sabbatical year. If you don't know what a sabbatical year is when you take time off work for a year and you don't work, but you also don't get paid for it. So it's just like a 1 year vacation, if you want to call it like that. So let's look at our verbs. Further to our discussion earlier, now just a quick side note, you would start your conversation with an expression, with a phrase like that, because further to our discussion, further to our conversation, further to our phone conversation, that's a formal way of beginning a discussion or re-beginning a discussion where, of course, you've had the previous one. And I would like to send out or submit the following proposal for your consideration. Of course, submit is a better choice for a formal language rather than send out. You would definitely use submit whenever you want to say that you send or you send out or you, let's say, deliver a letter, an email, a request, a complaint. So you better submit rather than any of the other choices. The second sentence, I understand that I qualify for a career break. Therefore, I would need 4 months of unpaid break, leave of absence of work. Now, the word break here, although it is used in the previous sentence, I qualify for a career break. Now, an unpaid break is not really a very common expression. Also, it repeats the word break. So I wouldn't use it a second time. for that consideration, on that consideration that it repeats. Also because what you are asking for is leave of absence. So that break, although a career break is an expression that is used, then you are requesting for leave of absence of work, meaning that you will not be present at work and you will not be working for a period of time. The word unpaid, of course, would also be important if you do request that, because you kind of have to specify in your request that this will be unpaid. Like you're not requesting for vacation for 4 months, because you see that our request is based on a 4-month request, a 4-month break. Okay, you can also say, I would need 4 months of leave of absence. You wouldn't necessarily need to specify of work, but you can do that without any problems. There's no mistake there. And then the difference between starting with and commencing in mid-May. Starting with is fine, is perfectly fine. You can use it in business settings. You can use it in professional settings. You can use it in relationship to your employer. But then commencing in is a little bit better. It's a little bit more formal. The use, fortunately, at the beginning of the second paragraph, states the tone of the paragraph. So we're not only talking about the use of different verbs or the use of phrasal verbs in a sentence or in a formal request. We also talk about the different expressions that you would use. And because it's a positive word, it definitely sets the tone and sets the type of information that I'm going to explain into this paragraph. So from the very beginning, the reader of your paragraph understands that now you are going to explain a positive message and you're going to submit a positive message. So the absence will not jeopardize my projects or will not interfere with my projects. The word interfere with is just a little bit better than jeopardize. Jeopardize is more informal, can also have a bit of a different meaning. Interfere with would mean that the absence would not be dangerous in any way to my project, as I will have finished or completed them by the end of April, meaning that my projects will be finished or completed by the end of April. Therefore, this absence will not interfere in any way, will not create any type of problems, will not create any damages or any losses for the company for not having been completed. So I would use interfere with instead of jeopardize. You can also use jeopardize, but definitely interfere with is more formal. Between finished and completed, well, there is a bit of a meaning difference here. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the use of future present perfect. I will have finished or I will have completed. So I'm going to talk about a moment in the future, placing myself after the moment of future has already happened. So that moment where the completion of the project is already done. So I place myself now after that. So then I would use the future present perfect, as I will have finished, as I will have completed them. And the difference between finished and completed is that when I use completed, which is what I want to use in my request here, is that I will have completed them, meaning that my job will be finished. I will have done all the tasks necessary, and I will have completed my responsibility, and all my targets will be met, and everything will be done by the end of April. If I say my project I will have finished, could actually mean that the project itself will be finished. So not necessarily that I will complete all my tasks. So, but they are interchangeable without any problems. There's a very slight difference between them. And also it's better to use completed rather than finished. For what I've mentioned before, but also because it's a better choice, not necessarily more formal, but it specifies or it sends out the right, it submits the right message when I use completed rather than finished. As for the daily workload, I am sure or certain that my colleagues can take care of or cover them. So if I talk about daily workload, this is a type of expression that you can use exactly as it is, as for the, and then you put the actual or words that you need, the nouns that you need to work with. I am sure, I am certain that, I am sure is also very good. I am certain that would then be a little more formal, so you can use that without any problems. Can take care of or cover them. To take care of is quite informal. You would then definitely choose cover instead of take care of. There are other possibilities as well. If you can find another possibility rather than cover, then please write them in the comment section and let's see what you can come up with. You can also definitely use a dictionary, so look it up. It's quite useful to know synonyms instead of take care of, because I'm sure you will find yourselves in a situation where you would need definitely to say, to have a word that would be similar in or a synonym of to take care of. Our last sentence, I like and I appreciate your support. Definitely like would not be the right choice. You cannot write to a supervisor, to a manager, to someone that needs to approve something that you like his support. Also, that's not really the right type of meaning that you want to submit to another person. You can like different other things, but you cannot really like the support. Therefore, you can like his leadership skills. You can like your colleagues very much, but then you can use, even if you like his leadership skills or you like your manager, you can use a different word for that, and that would be admire. I admire your leadership skills. I admire you as a leader. So like here doesn't really make the final cut. So you would say, I appreciate your support in this personal project or endeavor, and thank you for taking it forward for approval. Now, you can also use personal project, that's fine. Endeavor is very used in recruitment, very used in formal settings, very used when in the correspondence between employer and employee. So try to remember that word. You would definitely use it if you are going to write any type of letter to your supervisor, or if you make any request, or I think that even in requesting for a job or requesting for an interview, you can definitely use endeavor, as long as, of course, it fits the context. You cannot really just use it in any type of context. Well, you have to actually talk about an endeavor in order to use endeavor. So project is fine, but for example, you wouldn't be able to say, I appreciate your support in this project without the word personal, because then you would talk about the project at work. That wouldn't really be personal if you don't say the word personal. Also because your manager or your supervisor is not really involved in the personal project, aside from the fact that he needs to approve it, or he needs to give his support in order for the request to be approved. So endeavor is one word that can definitely be used here. Of course, this isn't a full request. A full request would also most probably include a brief description of that personal project. It definitely depends on the company's guidelines. If they do need to understand why you take this career break, I guess it would be important to know if it's for medical reasons, if it's for one of your hobbies, or maybe you have a side job, or you're a freelancer as well, if they actually permit that. So in case this happens to anybody, and I really hope that people should have a career break from now and then, of course, if you can afford to do that, then you would probably have to check the guidelines of your company and then see if you have to actually provide details of your project in the meantime of that endeavor. Another part that you can also consider including is stating why this career break or this leave of absence, in order to focus on something else, would benefit you as a professional, also could benefit the job that you make, or ultimately the company that you work for. So try to consider that as well. But in the future, we will also talk a little bit more about different types of letters that you can write in different situations. So we will also talk a little bit more about formal and informal language. There's a lot of material to cover. So you have to try as much as possible when you write an email or you write a letter to someone, that you select the best words that you can. Of course, sometimes it's redundant to use all formal words, because it also takes a little bit of the personal touch of the person writing. But as our lesson today was focused on phrasal verbs, then try to not use phrasal verbs, but mostly use just normal verbs. And then, of course, try to use verbs that are, or words that are closer to the business side rather than friendship. Another thing that I want to mention, which is quite important, but first let me stop sharing. Is that at the end of writing the email or writing the letter, you have to proofread your email and your letter. Before you actually submit it, then you have to make sure that there are no grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes, punctuation mistakes as well. So even if you write it for an acquaintance, or even if you write it for a friend, of course, you should always proofread. If need be, you can also ask someone to proofread it for you to make sure that there are no mistakes. At the same time, you have to read your sentences pretty carefully and make sure that the sentence actually conveys the message that you want it to convey, so that the message is not distorted in any way by the choice of words. You do know, and we all know, that vocabulary is pretty important, and that vocabulary can actually make or break a deal. So when choosing your words, try to be careful. Of course, when writing an email or writing a letter, unless you are pressured by time, you can take all the time that you need in order to find the best solutions. Also, because you would definitely need to have a pretty positive outcome to your email or your letter. Therefore, a great deal of consideration should be given to the language that you use. So this is it for today. I really hope this was useful, and I really hope that you will be that you will be able to use this information in your work with your company or your employer. And I really hope that you will join me the next time and we will talk more about vocabulary. So this is it. Have a nice day and I'll see you at the next class.